He saw a blue-skinned alien girl scavenging leftovers like a dog in the rain-soaked marketplace. But when wild packs threatened her, the mechanic's instinct kicked in. That simple act of offering a nutrient bar would unravel a secret that could alter the fate of billions across the galaxy. Kieran Wolfe worked in a repair shop on Terrace. It was a cramped space with tools scattered across metal benches. His hands were always stained with engine grease, his knuckles bruised from stubborn bolts. The jacket he wore had gotten thin at the elbows, patched more than once. He kept to himself, avoided conversation, stayed in his lane. The work was steady. He fixed power converters and broken stabilizers, things that hummed and whirred. He never fixed people. He'd seen enough trouble to keep his head down. Past mistakes made him cautious. The colony outside his door was loud and crowded, full of sharp deals and sharper knives. He preferred the quiet company of machines. Their problems were logical. A frayed wire, a burnt-out circuit. Fix it, test it, move on. People were different. Their problems were messy. They lied, they broke promises, they disappeared. It was easier to repair a broken engine than a broken trust. That was the rule he lived by. Neon lights from the market strips bled into his shop at night. They reflected in the puddles on the permacrete after the rain. He'd watch the colors ripple, green and purple and electric blue. The noise of the crowd was a constant buzz, a tide of voices and footsteps. He tuned it out, focused on the work in front of him. The hum of a functioning reactor was a clean sound, predictable. It didn't ask for anything he couldn't give. His fear of connection was something he wore like armor. He didn't make eye contact, didn't start conversations. When traders came to his stall, he spoke about parts and prices, nothing more. He saw himself as a mechanic, a pair of hands that could make things work again. That was the limit of what he offered. That was the limit of what he was. Then he saw her through the streaked window, out in the rain, shuffling through refuse near a closed vendor's stall. A blue-skinned girl, thin and soaked. She moved with a desperation that was familiar on Terrace. He watched for a moment, his hand pausing on the hydrospanner he was cleaning. Something in her posture caught him. Attention, a wariness. The wild packs were starting to circle, their low growls just audible over the downpour. He saw the way she clutched a half-rotted fruit, how her eyes scanned for exits. And in that moment, the wall he'd built around himself cracked. Just a little. He put the tool down. He reached for a sealed nutrient bar from his shelf. His boots sounded heavy on the floor as he moved toward the door. The rain was coming down harder now. She hadn't seen him yet. Everything was about to change. She moved along the edge of the waste chutes while the crowd flowed past. No one looked down. People hurried by under glowing signs, their footsteps splashing through oily puddles. Their faces were turned away from the gutters. She was just another piece of the scenery, something to step around. Her blue skin caught the neon light, making it seem almost electric in the rain. Water ran in thin streams down her arms and face. She wasn't crying. Her expression was flat, focused. The cold didn't seem to touch her. Wild packs were common in the lower market. They moved in shadows, hunting scraps and weak targets. 3 of them circled her now, their eyes catching the dim glow from the alley mouths. Low growls rumbled in their throats. They were lean and quick, with matted fur and sharp teeth. They knew she was alone. They knew she was vulnerable. She kept moving, but her steps were measured. She didn't run. She held a half-eaten crust of bread in one hand, her knuckles white. There was a grace to her that didn't fit. Even soaked and dirty, she moved like someone used to open spaces and clean air. Her back was straight. Her chin was level. Her eyes were a clear, bright silver, and they scanned everything. The packs, the crowd, the rooftops. She was assessing, not pleading. This wasn't just about hunger. It was about survival, and she was counting every option. Kieran held out the nutrient bar. It was a simple gesture, one he'd made before to stray animals or homeless drifters. But this time was different. She didn't grab it. She looked at his hand, then his face, then the bar. Her eyes narrowed. She reached out slowly and took it, her fingers careful not to touch his. She turned it over, checking the seal along the edge. She inspected the manufacturer's stamp. Only when she was sure it was intact and untainted did she nod once. It was a calculated acceptance. There was no gratitude, only acknowledgement. She trusted no one. Not the packs, not the crowd, not the man offering food. That was clear in every line of her body. She had learned the hard way that help often came with a price. Kindness could be a trap. She tucked the bar into a fold of her wet tunic without opening it. Her eyes stayed on Kieran, wary but not afraid. She was deciding whether he was a threat, a resource, or neither. Kieran saw something in that moment that the crowd missed. They saw a scavenger, a blue-skinned gutter rat. He saw intelligence. He saw discipline. He saw a person who had been trained to evaluate risk, to think under pressure. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was control. Her stillness wasn't weakness, it was readiness. He didn't know what it meant yet. He didn't know who she was or why she was here, but the wall he had built around his life, the careful isolation he maintained, was about to come down, and it started with a pair of silver eyes in the rain, deciding whether to trust him. The nutrient bar was standard issue: protein, vitamins, synthetic glucose. It wasn't special. It was just food. Kieran held it out, his arm extended into the rain. The wrapper was smooth and sealed. He didn't say anything. The girl, Celia, looked from his face to the bar and back. Her silver eyes were sharp, reading his intent. She took it without touching his hand. Her fingers were quick and cold. She inspected the seams, checked for needle marks or tampering. Only then did she slip it into a hidden pocket. Her silence wasn't rude. It was smart. In that simple exchange, Kieran crossed a line. He had rules. Don't get involved. Don't make attachments. Don't offer help that isn't asked for. He'd drawn that line years ago, after trusting the wrong person cost him more than credits. It was a boundary that kept him safe, that kept his world small and manageable. But he'd just stepped over it. He'd seen the packs closing in, seen the way she stood her ground instead of running. He acted without thinking. The part of him that still remembered how to care for something other than a machine had taken over. Her wariness was a tool, not a flaw. It was what kept her alive. She didn't thank him because gratitude made you vulnerable. It created debt, and debt could be called in. She slept in the warm air exhaust shafts above the market. The grates were hot to the touch, but they kept off the rain and the worst of the cold. She moved between them, never staying in one place more than a night. She knew which vendors tossed out edible scraps and which ones poisoned their trash to keep scavengers away. Her life was a series of calculated risks, and accepting food from a stranger was one of them. Kieran kept his voice low. He pointed with his chin toward a service alley 2 blocks over. The ventilation hub behind the spice merchant, he said. The grates are tighter there, harder for packs to get through. He didn't know why he was telling her. The words were out before he could stop them. He'd seen her type before, people who lived in the margins, who knew every hiding spot. But she listened. She didn't nod, but her eyes flicked toward the alley he mentioned. She filed the information away. He felt a pull in his chest, a tightness he hadn't felt in years. It was the urge to protect, to stand between her and the things that wanted to hurt her. He'd buried that feeling deep. It was dangerous. It got people killed. But seeing her alone in the rain, holding on to that crust of bread like it was a lifeline, woke something up. It was a reflex, like catching something before it shatters on the floor. This was the first time he'd genuinely helped another person since he came to Terrace. Not a transaction, not a repair job, just an act. No payment expected, no favor to be returned. It was a crack in the armor he'd welded around himself. That small gesture, that moment of unwanted connection, ignited something. A bond formed in the space between his offering and her acceptance. It was thin, fragile, but it was real. He couldn't take it back. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen her. His isolation, his carefully maintained solitude, had just been breached. This was where it started to break apart. They didn't see her approach. One moment they were standing in the dripping shadows of the service alley. The next, a woman was there. She moved without sound, her boots making no mark on the wet permacrete. Her clothes were practical, dark and clean. Her eyes were a calm, steady green. She was Verdoni. Her skin had the faint silver undertone, her ears slightly tapered. She looked at Celia, then at Kieran. Her expression was serious but not unkind. "You need to come with me," she said. Her voice was low, meant only for them. Now, her name was Arya. She was a doctor, but she didn't carry a med kit. She carried herself like a soldier assessing a battlefield. She led them away from the main thoroughfares into a narrower alley that smelled of damp rust and old wiring. She didn't look back to see if they followed. She expected obedience. When she stopped, she turned to face them. "The Black Mine Syndicate has a contract on her," Arya said, her eyes on Celia. They have trackers, bounty hunters, informants in every port. Their ships are armed freighters. Their credits by silence. You are not hiding. You are waiting to be found. Kieran started to speak to ask a question, but Arya cut him off. She is not a stray, she said. Her tone was flat, factual. She is the primary target of a corporate purge. They didn't just burn her home. They erased it. Celia had been watching, her silver eyes wide but not scared. She understood every word. She reached inside her ragged tunic and pulled out a pendant on a thin chain. It was a circle of polished gray stone, etched with a complex emblem, a star intersecting a vertical line. It was the seal of House Ilarion, a royal house, a dead house. Celia spoke for the first time since the marketplace. Her voice was quiet but clear. My father pushed me into a service vent. He told me to run and not look back. Then the doors exploded. She didn't cry. She stated it, a fact, a thing that happened. She was the last daughter of a ruling family that no longer ruled anything. Her planet was under syndicate control. Her people were scattered or enslaved. She was a princess with no throne, no army, no home, just a pendant and a price on her head. Kieran looked from the girl to the doctor. His repair shop with its locked door and its humming machines felt very far away. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a fixed location, a place they would eventually come to. The tools on his bench were for fixing engines, not fighting wars. The choices he made in the rain had drawn a line from his quiet life to this. He was in it now. The mechanic was part of her war. There was no debate, no discussion. The fact of the syndicate's pursuit, the truth of her identity. These were stones laid on a path. He was already walking it. He could turn back, but they would find her. They would find him too for having helped her. The neutral ground he had occupied for years was gone. The world had become simple. There were sides. He had chosen one by offering a nutrient bar. There was no going back to the way things were. The weight of it settled in his stomach, cold and solid. Arya led them deeper into the maintenance tunnels. The air was cooler there, smelling of damp metal and ozone. She stopped beside a humming power conduit, its blue light washing over their faces. She looked at Celia, then at Kieran. Her expression was grim. You need to understand what they want, Arya said. It isn't just her. It's what she carries. She explained it plainly. Celia's blood held more than royal lineage. Her genetic code was a living archive. Her ancestors had encoded vital information into their DNA, a failsafe against invasion or total destruction. It wasn't just history. It was strategy, star charts of hidden routes through unstable nebulas, invasion plans detailing Draenoid fleet formations and weapon vulnerabilities. The location of their next major offensive, it was all there, written in her cells, a biological library that could only be accessed by her bloodline. She was a repository, a walking secret. The Draenoids knew this. They had studied fallen Azuran worlds, dissected captives, pieced it together. They weren't just hunting a princess to eliminate a symbol. They were hunting a database. If they captured her, if they found a way to extract the data, they would gain everything they needed to crush the last free human colonies. They would know every weak point, every blind spot in the frontier defenses. Billions of lives depended on her survival. Her death would be a tragedy. Her capture would be a catastrophe. It would mean the end of any organized resistance. Kieran listened. He watched Celia's face. She stood straight, her silver eyes fixed on Arya. She already knew. She had been running with this weight her whole life. The nutrient bar, the scavenging, the hiding. It wasn't just about staying alive. It was about keeping the secret out of enemy hands. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the constant assessment. She wasn't a helpless child. She was a vital asset. A key. His perspective shifted. The grease on his hands, the tools in his shop, they weren't just for fixing broken-down speeders anymore. They had a purpose. His knowledge of systems, of power grids, and security networks could be used to protect her, to hide her, to fight back. He wasn't just a mechanic helping a refugee. He was a technician safeguarding the most important intelligence in the sector. The loneliness he had clung to felt small now. Petty. The girl who ate scraps from the gutter was the galaxy's best hope. He had to see that. He had to look past the ragged clothes and the blue skin and see the weapon she carried inside her. She was more than a princess. She was a map, a plan, a chance. His jaw tightened. The hum of the conduit filled the silence. The stakes were no longer theoretical. They were written in her blood. The work ahead was clear. Keep her alive. Keep the data safe. Everything else was secondary. Arya found it. She ran her hands along the seam of Celia's tunic, her fingers pausing over a patch of slightly stiffer fabric. It was a micro-tracker, no larger than a thumbnail woven into the cloth. The Black Minds had tagged her. Like cargo. Like property. They weren't just hunting her. They were monitoring her. Every alley she hid in, every vent she slept in, they knew. Her movements were a live feed to their command center. There was no safe place left. Every move they made was now exposed. Every shadow they used for cover was illuminated. The hideouts they knew, the routes they trusted, all of it was compromised. The Syndicate could pick their moment. They could surround them with a full assault team whenever they chose. Waiting was a death sentence. Running was a delay. The tracker meant the initiative was gone. They were reacting, not acting. Kieran took out his multi-tool. The small device whirred as he extended the fine-point probe. He didn't rip the patch out. That might trigger an alert. He worked carefully, his grease-stained hands steady. He pried up the edge of the fabric and severed the filigree thin power leads one by one. The tiny light on the device faded to black. It was a temporary fix. They would know the signal was lost. It just bought a little time. Silence filled the damp tunnel. The only sound was the drip of water on metal. Arya didn't speak. She checked the charge on her sidearm. The motion was smooth, practiced. She adjusted the straps on her tactical harness, tightening them. Her calm was a tangible thing. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was the presence of readiness. Her green eyes scanned the tunnel exits, calculating angles of approach, fields of fire. She was preparing for the fight she knew was coming. Her stillness was more threatening than any bluster. They defied a superior foe through trust and strategy. The Black Mind Syndicate had numbers. They had ships and weapons and credits. Kieran, Arya, and Celia had none of that. They had each other. Their plan relied on perfect timing, on each person performing their role without hesitation. Kieran's overload, Arya's silent takedowns, Celia's disruptions. They moved as one unit, a single organism with 3 specialized parts. Their trust was not given lightly. It was earned in the moments between life and death, in the shared glances that meant move now or cover me. The Black Minds were broken on Terrace. Their primary facility was in chaos. Their local commander was frozen in a cryocell. Their hold on the colony was shattered, but the war continued. This was a single battle. The Syndicate was a vast network, a hydra with many heads. The real enemy, the Draenoid invasion force, was still moving. Their victory was real, but it was local. It was a proof of concept. It showed that the giant could be made to bleed. They represented a new kind of resistance. Not a grand army with banners and fleets. Not a government's organized defense. They were a small cell. A mechanic, a doctor, a princess. Their strength was adaptability. They used the enemy's resources against them. They fought with wrenches and telekinesis and quiet precision. They were harder to see, harder to target than a conventional force. They were a virus, not a bomb. Their alliance showed that strength lies in unity. Alone, each of them was vulnerable. Kieran was just a man in a shop. Arya was a medic without a core. Celia was a girl in the rain. Together they were a force. Their skills interlocked. Kieran's plans created the openings Arya needed. Arya's protection gave Celia the space to use her power. Celia's intelligence guided Kieran's strategies. They were greater than the sum of their parts. They were the fragile counterforce to invasion. A small dedicated group standing against a tidal wave. Their existence was a flicker of hope in a darkening galaxy. They had proven that the Syndicate could be hurt. Now they had to prove the Draenoids could be stopped. The real work began at Verdani Prime. The warning had to be delivered. The evidence had to be shown. The scattered pieces of the resistance had to be gathered and forged into a real weapon. The journey was far from over. It was just entering a new, more dangerous phase. It started with a nutrient bar offered in the rain. A simple act. Kieran extended his hand, the sealed wrapper glistening with water. He expected nothing in return. No thanks, no favor. The girl took it without touching his fingers, her silver eyes assessing the risk. It was a transaction of basic humanity, the kind most people on Terrace ignored every day. That small gesture crossed a line he had drawn years ago. It was the first crack in the wall he'd built around his life. That single act of kindness unraveled a secret. It led him to a doctor in the shadows, to the truth of a royal bloodline, to a genetic library that held the key to stopping an invasion. That nutrient bar was the first domino. Its fall set off a chain reaction that would ultimately impact billions of lives. The fate of entire star systems hinged on that moment. A shared future of freedom or subjugation began with one man's decision to see a person where others saw a problem. Kieran saw Celia not as a scavenger, but as a person. The crowd moved past her, their eyes averted. They saw a blue-skinned gutter rat, a piece of the scenery. He saw intelligence in her eyes. He saw a grim determination in the way she held her body. He saw someone who was calculating her next move, not begging for her next meal. That sight, that simple acknowledgement of her humanity, changed everything. It was the spark. That spark ignited courage. It forged an alliance between a mechanic, a doctor, and a princess. It created hope where there had been only despair. His willingness to see her value gave them all a reason to fight. It turned a solitary man into a protector, a hunted girl into a leader, a quiet medic into a strategist. Their individual strengths, once isolated, combined into a force greater than the sum of its parts. They became a unit, a team. The marketplace where it began was forgotten behind them. The vendor stalls, the neon lights reflecting in puddles, the smell of spiced meat and engine exhaust. It was all a memory. But the act itself echoed. Its consequences rippled outward, touching lives in star systems Kieran had never even heard of. The choice to help one person in the rain became a story that would be told on other worlds, a reminder that no act of decency is ever truly small. It reminded them that value is often overlooked. The most important things are frequently discarded, hidden in plain sight, or hunted to the edge of extinction. A princess can look like a scavenger. A mechanic can be a strategist. A simple nutrient bar can be a key that unlocks a galaxy. The trick is to look closer, to see the potential that everyone else misses. Fighting back began with seeing dignity in others. The war against the Syndicate, the resistance to the Draenoid invasion, it didn't start with a fleet engagement or a grand speech. It started with a moment of connection. It started when one person decided another was worth helping. The real battle was not for territory or resources. It was for the principle that every life has inherent worth. That was the foundation everything else was built on. This story was just the first battle in a larger war. The facility on Terrace was a single victory. The data drive was a crucial piece of evidence, but the invasion clock was still ticking. The real conflict, the fight for the future, was just beginning. They had a warning. They had a plan. They had a team. The road to Verdani Prime was long, and the Council would need convincing. The payoff was a future where humanity fights back. It was a chance to turn a story of survival into a blueprint for victory. The girl who ate scraps would help build a coalition. The mechanic who kept to himself would help fortify a defense. Their journey proved that even against overwhelming odds, a small group of determined people can make a difference. It proved that the fight is never hopeless as long as someone is willing to see the value in another and act on it. The war wasn't won, but it was joined. A mechanic's choice to see dignity sparked a resistance. He offered a nutrient bar in the rain, seeing not a scavenger but a person. That single act ignited a chain of events. It forged an alliance, exposed a secret, and set them on a path to challenge an empire. Now the real work begins. Billions of lives hang in the balance, and their small, unlikely team is all that stands between freedom and conquest. The toughest battles are still ahead. Remember, value is often where others see nothing. Hope starts with a simple act of recognition. Celia watched the dead tracker in Kieran's palm. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but it didn't paralyze her. It hardened. Her jaw set. Her silver eyes lost their wide, hunted look. They became focused, sharp. They couldn't run forever. Hiding was a temporary state. The Syndicate had resources, ships, soldiers. They would keep coming. The only way to stop them was to hurt them, to break their ability to chase her. Survival was no longer about escape. It was about attack. Kieran's repair shop was a memory. It was a fixed point, a known location. They would go there for supplies, for tools, but they couldn't stay. It was the first place the Syndicate would look once they realized the tracker was offline. His sanctuary was now a trap. The humming machines, the bench stained with oil, the locked door, none of it could protect them. His old life was officially over. The tools remained, but their purpose had changed. They huddled in the blue light of the conduit. The plan formed quickly. They would infiltrate Draxer Ka's ore processing facility. It was the Syndicate's central nerve on Terrace. Disrupting it would cause chaos, draw their forces inward, make them look vulnerable. It was a direct strike. A message. Kieran's knowledge of industrial systems became their primary weapon. He knew the facility's power grid, its ventilation shafts, its security blind spots. He could map its weaknesses like he mapped a faulty circuit board. He wasn't a soldier. He was an engineer, and he knew how to make complex systems fail. His mind, trained to fix things, was now tasked with breaking one very big thing. The explosion ripped through the refinery's main power conduit. Alarms screamed. Thick black smoke poured from ruptured pipes, filling the corridor with a choking haze. Emergency lights flickered, casting frantic red shadows. Black Mine's operatives advanced through the chaos, their armored forms visible in the gaps between the smoke. They moved in a tight wedge, weapons raised. Stun bolts cracked against metal walls. They weren't trying to kill. They were trying to capture. They wanted Celia alive. They were cornered against a bulkhead. Kieran held a heavy wrench in one hand, a length of pipe in the other. He had no rifle, no body armor, just the tools from his shop and the stubborn will to use them. Arya was a blur of motion beside him. She disarmed the lead operative with a sharp twist of his wrist, dropped him with a strike to the neck. She moved with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. Every motion was precise, economical. She created openings where there were none. Then Celia did something new. A crate of metal components levitated off a pallet. It hung in the air for a heartbeat, then shot forward, slamming into two advancing guards. They went down hard. Conduits lining the ceiling tore loose, whipping through the air like angry snakes. She wasn't just moving objects. She was unraveling the factory itself. Her face was pale, strained. A thin trickle of blood ran from her nose. She had hidden this, feared it. Now she used it to save them. Kieran fought with what he had. He parried a stun baton with his wrench, the impact shuddering up his arm. He swung the pipe low, taking a guard's legs out. This wasn't a soldier's fight. It was a brawl. It was grit and desperation. He used the environment, kicking over barrels of lubricant, creating slicks on the floor. He fought to create space, to give Celia time to breathe, to let Arya work. Arya moved through the smoke like a ghost. She used the confusion as her weapon. She didn't engage directly unless she had to. She targeted weapons hands, communication gear, knee joints. She dropped operatives with quick, disabling strikes and moved on before they hit the ground. Her calm was absolute. She was the eye of the storm, a point of deadly stillness in the center of the maelstrom. The way out was a maintenance hatch set low in the wall. Kieran knew it led to the sub-level service tunnels. He pried it open with the end of his wrench. The metal groaned in protest. "Here!" he shouted over the alarm's wail. Arya covered the retreat, her sidearms spitting precise, quiet shots that punched holes in control panels, spraying sparks into the faces of their pursuers. Celia didn't go first. She stood her ground, her hand outstretched. A heavy piece of machinery screeched as it twisted, blocking the corridor behind them. "Together," she said. Her voice was tight with effort. "No one gets left." It wasn't a request. It was an order. She would not run unless they all did. They dropped into the darkness of the maintenance tunnels. The roar of the factory faded above them, replaced by the drip of water and their own ragged breathing. The air was cool and still. They were safe for a moment. Kieran looked at Celia, then at Arya, the mechanic, the doctor, the princess. They had just fought a holding action against a superior force and survived. They had relied on each other without question. The trust that had been a thin thread in the rain was now a forged bond. It had been tested in fire and smoke and held. They were no longer three separate people thrown together by chance. They were a unit, a team. Each had a role. Each had proven their value. The escape was a victory, but the real shift was internal. They knew they could depend on each other. The fight ahead was still immense, but they would face it together. Celia's abilities were a natural part of her Azuran heritage, but she had been taught to conceal them. For a hunted person, standing out meant capture. Using her mind to influence the physical world was a quick way to draw the wrong kind of attention. It was a risk she could not afford, so she kept the gift locked away. A suppressed potential she viewed more as a threat than a tool. It was a part of herself she was taught to deny. She could move objects with her mind. It wasn't magic. It was a physical trait, like an animal adapted to see in the dark. But she feared it. Every use was a beacon. a flare in the darkness that announced her presence to her hunters. Exposure meant the Syndicate would redouble their efforts. They wouldn't just want the data in her blood. They would want to understand the weapon she could become. Her caution was a matter of survival, deeply ingrained through years of flight and loss. Now those rules were gone. The factory assault changed the calculation. They were outgunned, outnumbered. Her telekinesis was no longer a liability. It was their only real edge against an enemy with superior numbers and firepower. The cost of using it was less than the cost of being caught. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overruled by necessity. Survival required new rules. In the smoke-filled corridors, she acted. She focused her will and dropped a heavy ceiling panel, blocking a squad of advancing guards. She tore metal shards from a shattered console and sent them spinning into the path of another group. The effort was visible. Her hands shook. A thin line of blood ran from her nose. Each act of telekinesis was a physical drain, pulling energy from her core. But it worked. It created chaos, opening paths for escape. Kieran watched her. He saw the strain on her face, the determination in her silver eyes. He did not see a scared child anymore. He saw a strategic asset, a force multiplier. Her ability to disrupt the environment, to turn the facility itself against their enemies, was more valuable than any weapon they carried. She was a living tool, and her power could tilt the odds in their favor. His view of her shifted completely. She was not someone to protect. She was someone to deploy. Arya moved beside her, her voice a calm counterpoint to the screaming alarms. "Breathe," she instructed. "Don't push. Guide it." Arya understood the Azuran gift. Her guidance was practical, tactical. She taught Celia to focus her efforts, to use the power economically. A short, sharp shove against a weapon hand was better than a sustained effort to lift a heavy crate. Control was more important than force. In the middle of the chaos, she offered a lesson in precision. She showed her how to weaponize her fear. Each use left Celia more drained, her limbs heavy, her head pounding. But with each successful act, her resolve strengthened. The power was no longer a curse she carried. It was a choice she made. She could use it to hide, or she could use it to fight. She chose to fight. The exhaustion was a price she was willing to pay. The fear of being discovered was replaced by the determination to protect the two people fighting beside her. She embraced the ability she had spent her life suppressing. It was part of her, and denying it was a weakness. To protect Kieran and Arya, she needed every tool available. The power was not just for her survival anymore. It was for theirs. The princess, the last daughter of a murdered house, was shedding the skin of a victim. She was becoming something else. A warrior. A protector. A key player in her own fate. The transformation was written in the set of her jaw and the focus in her eyes. She was done hiding. They targeted the ore processing facility. It was Draxor Ka's central nerve on Terrace, a sprawling complex of refineries and storage silos, surrounded by high fences and patrols. Kieran knew the layout. He'd done repair work there years ago before the Syndicate took over. He remembered the power grid, its weak points, how the main conduits ran too close to the coolant lines. He could create a targeted overload. Not enough to destroy the place, just enough to trip safety protocols. It would plunge key sections into darkness, trigger secondary alarms. Controlled chaos. The kind that would pull guards from their posts, send maintenance teams scrambling. It would be a window. A narrow one. The plan was built on their strengths. Arya would move ahead of them. She knew how to neutralize guards without raising an alarm. A pressure point strike to the neck. A quiet takedown in a shadowed corridor. She would clear a path. A series of silent openings through the security net. Her role was precision. Elimination without escalation. Celia's enhanced hearing would pick up patrol movements through bulkheads. She could sense the vibration of boots on grating, the shift of air from an opening door. Her telekinesis would handle the rest. She could turn security cameras away, jam electronic locks, or quietly move obstacles from their path. Her power was their key. It bypassed systems that tools and weapons could not. Their objective was not just to get in and out. They needed to retrieve a specific data drive from Ka's private server. It held more than just corporate secrets. It contained proof of the Draenoid invasion plans, fleet dispositions, timetables. It was the tangible evidence the Verdani High Council would need to believe a princess from a fallen house. Without it, her story was just a story. The drive was the difference between a warning and a rumor. Kieran's role had changed. He was no longer just the mechanic with the tools. He was the strategist, the one who understood the machine they were trying to break. He mapped their route not as a path, but as a circuit. Each movement was a connection. Each action was a switch being thrown. His mind, used to diagnosing faults in complex systems, now worked to insert one. He saw the facility as a flawed piece of engineering, and he knew how to make it fail on their terms. Every part of the plan had to function in perfect sync. Arya's takedowns, Celia's disruptions, his overload. Their timing had to be exact. A misstep by one would jeopardize all of them. There was no room for error, no backup plan. The facility was a fortress. If they were discovered, if the alarm was raised before they were in position, they would be surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. Failure here wasn't just a setback. It wasn't just them getting captured or killed. If they failed, the data drive stayed with Kai. The Syndicate's operations would continue unchecked. The Draenoid invasion would proceed on schedule. Billions would remain unaware of the threat moving toward them. The stakes were no longer personal. They were galactic. The weight of that knowledge settled over them as they made their final preparations. The plan was set. The machine was designed. Now they had to make it run. They moved under the cover of darkness, 3 shadows against the facility's outer wall. The night air was cold and carried the smell of ozone and processed metal. Kieran found the service hatch he remembered. Its lock rusted from neglect. His multi-tool made short work of it. The hinges groaned softly as he pulled it open. They slipped inside one by one, into the narrow space between the outer wall and the main conduit runs. The air here was warmer, thick with the hum of massive generators. Kieran located the primary junction box for the western sector. He opened the panel, his hands moving with a mechanic's certainty amidst the tangle of colored cables. He didn't need schematics. He knew this system. He rerouted 2 heavy-gauge power lines, bypassing a safety relay. The lights along the corridor flickered violently, then died. A deep thrumming sound echoed through the floor as emergency systems struggled to compensate. Red emergency strips glowed to life, painting everything in a dim, bloody light. The planned chaos had begun. Guards responded immediately. Boots pounded on grating. Voices shouted questions down comms. Weapons were drawn. The low whine of charged stun rods cutting through the alarm's wail. They moved in pairs, sweeping the corridors, their attention torn between the power failure and the possibility of intruders. They were alert but confused. The disruption had worked. Celia didn't need a signal. She focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. Down the hall, a surveillance camera mounted high on the wall shattered. Its lens cracked, then its housing crumpled inward with a sharp crunch of plastic and glass. Another camera further down twisted on its mount, pointing uselessly at the ceiling. She moved systematically, eliminating their eyes one by one. A fine tremor ran through her hands. The effort was a steady drain, but she kept going. Arya became a part of the shadows. She separated from them, flowing ahead into the confused patrols. A guard turned a corner, his rifle raised. He never saw her. Her hand struck the side of his neck, a precise, sharp motion. He collapsed without a sound. She caught his rifle before it clattered on the floor and laid it down quietly. She moved to the next one, a swift and silent disruption in the Syndicate's response. She was creating gaps in their security, opening a path through sheer, quiet efficiency. They slipped through a heavy security door, just as it began to automatically seal. Kieran jammed the mechanism with the ceramic wedge from his belt. The door shuddered and stopped, leaving a narrow gap. It was a door meant to lock them out, to contain any breach. Now it was their passage. They moved into a wider corridor, this one lined with pipes sweating condensation. The environment was a maze, but Kieran navigated it by memory and instinct. His hands, once stained with engine grease from fixing speeders, now held stripped cables and calibrated tools. He wasn't repairing anything. He was dismantling. His knowledge of systems was being used to take them apart, to exploit their weaknesses. The facility was a giant, complex machine, and he was the fault in its wiring. Every junction box, every access panel was an opportunity. He saw the whole structure not as a building, but as a schematic of vulnerabilities. The facility was a landscape of danger and possibility. Steam vents hissed from loose seals. Conduits carried enough power to vaporize a person. Patrols were everywhere. But the chaos was also their shield. The confusion he had created gave them room to move. The maze had paths only he could see. They advanced, step by cautious step, deeper into the enemy's stronghold. Each turn brought them closer to the command level, closer to Draxor Ka. The mechanic was in the heart of the machine. He was no longer an outsider looking in. He was a critical flaw in the system, a virus in the circuitry. His purpose had been utterly rewritten. He was there to break the machine from the inside. The door to the command center hissed open. Draxor Ka stood waiting. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and solid like a piece of heavy machinery. His shaved head was a map of old scars. His eyes were cold. He held a heavy energy blade, its edge humming with a low, dangerous frequency. He didn't look surprised to see them. He looked amused. He ignored Kieran and Arya. His attention fixed on Celia. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "The last pup of a dead pack," he said. His voice was a low rumble. "Scavenging in my streets. Did you think you could hide forever? Your family's bones are dust. Their name is nothing." He took a step forward, the blade held loosely at his side. The taunts were meant to wound, to distract. They were personal. He wanted to see her break. Kieran moved first. He swung the length of pipe he carried. It was a desperate, clumsy attack. Ka blocked it with his armored forearm. The impact jarred Kieran's whole body. The pipe clattered to the floor. Ka backhanded him. A casual, powerful blow that sent Kieran stumbling into a console. Sparks flew. Kieran's vision swam. He was a mechanic with a wrench, not a soldier. He was outmatched. Arya moved in. She was fast, a blur of controlled motion. She targeted the seams in Ka's armor, the weak points at his joints. Her strikes were precise, meant to disable. But the armor held. Ka shrugged them off. He was too strong, too heavily protected. He backhanded her too, sending her crashing into a bank of monitors. Glass shattered. She didn't get up immediately. Celia stood her ground. Her hands were raised. Behind Ka, two of his guards lifted into the air, slammed against the wall and slumped to the floor unconscious. She was using her power to clear the room, to give them a chance. But the strain was immense. Blood trickled from her nose. Her arms shook. Holding Ka himself was beyond her. He was too massive, his will too strong. Kieran pushed himself up. His ribs ached. His mouth tasted of blood. He saw a sharpened calibration tool on a nearby workbench. It was meant for fine adjustments, not combat. He grabbed it. He didn't charge, he waited. As Ka turned toward Celia, Kieran lunged. He drove the sharpened tool into the gap between two plates on Ka's back. It wasn't a killing blow. It was a distraction. Ka roared in pain and surprise, his concentration broken. In that instant, Celia acted. She didn't try to move Ka. She focused on his weapon hand. A small, perfectly ordinary slingshot was in her hand. She loaded a metal bearing and fired. It struck Ka's wrist with a sharp crack. His fingers spasmed. The energy blade clattered to the floor, its hum dying. The attack was small, almost pathetic, but it was perfectly timed. While Ka was disarmed and distracted, Arya moved. She had gotten to her feet. She didn't go for Ka. She went for the objective. She slid past the confrontation to the main server bank. Her fingers flew across the interface, bypassing security protocols. A small data drive ejected into her hand. She pocketed it. The primary mission was accomplished. Ka turned enraged, just as Kieran hit a console control. A section of the floor near Ka's feet slid open. It was a maintenance hatch for the cryogenic coolant lines. A blast of super-cold vapor erupted. Ka lost his footing. He fell into the opening, his roar cut short. The hatch sealed automatically. Through the thick viewport, they saw him frozen in place, a statue of rage and shock, encapsulated in ice. The fight was over. Celia lowered her hands. She wiped the blood from her upper lip. Her breathing was ragged, but her voice was steady. She looked at the frozen figure. "My family is avenged." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a cry. It was a statement. A fact, a line drawn. The fear was gone from her eyes. Something harder had taken its place. They fled through corridors choked with black smoke. The air stung their lungs, thick with the smell of burnt wiring and melted plastisteel. Alarms wailed, a constant piercing shriek. Behind them, the heavy footfalls of Black Mine's operatives echoed. They were relentless. Their orders were clear. Capture the girl. Kill the others. They moved in a tight formation, weapons scanning the haze. Kieran led them, his mind working fast. He knew this facility's guts. He found a maintenance panel set into the wall, his fingers prying it open. Inside was a tangle of pipes and valves. He didn't hesitate. He twisted a large valve handle. A deep gurgling sound echoed through the pipes. Further down the corridor, a main coolant line burst. A torrent of chemical-laced water flooded the passage, swirling around the knees of their pursuers. It wasn't deadly. It was an obstacle. It slowed them down, broke their momentum. He didn't stop there. He located a power relay junction. Using a tool from his belt, he shorted 2 primary conduits. The lights flickered violently. Then a massive power surge exploded from a transformer bank down a side corridor. A shower of blue-white sparks filled the air, forcing the operatives to duck for cover. The surge overloaded their comms, filling their helmets with static. The confusion was their shield. Kieran was using the factory's own systems against its defenders. He turned the environment from a threat into an ally. Their path ended at a heavy circular hatch. It was marked with hazard symbols. A waste disposal chute. Kieran hit the manual release. The hatch groaned open. A foul smell of chemical waste and decay wafted out. It was a straight drop into darkness. They could hear the rain hitting metal far below. It was their only way out. They dropped into the chute one after another, sliding down into the unknown. They landed in a deep puddle of oily, rain-diluted effluent. The toxic rain of terrace fell on them, stinging their skin and soaking their clothes. They were in a narrow service alley behind the facility's perimeter fence. The complex was a scene of utter chaos behind them. Flames licked from broken windows. Smoke billowed into the night sky. Sirens blared from multiple directions. They had done it. They had broken the Syndicate's grip on their strongest asset. Kieran's knowledge had been their map through the chaos. He saw the facility not as walls and doors, but as a system of pressures and flows. He diverted them. He blocked them. He used them. His understanding of machinery, once used to fix things, had become a weapon for breaking them apart. It was the only reason they were alive. Celia stood in the rain, water streaming down her face. She didn't try to hide her blue skin or her silver eyes. She didn't hunch her shoulders or look at the ground. She stood straight, her gaze fixed on the distant lights of the starport. The girl who had scavenged in shadows was gone. In her place was a person who had faced a monster and won. She moved with a new purpose, a clear direction. She was done running. They moved through the wet, dark streets, sticking to the shadows but no longer fearing them. They reached a designated landing pad on the edge of the starport. An old, battered smuggler's ship sat there, its engines whining at a low idle. The ramp was down. Freedom was close enough to touch. They had made it. The mechanic had navigated them through hell. He had used every bit of his skill, every scrap of his knowledge to guide them out. The man who fixed broken machines had just orchestrated the most complex repair job of his life. He had fixed their escape. Captain Vex met them at the base of the ramp. He was a lean man with a worn face and a calm, assessing gaze. He didn't ask for names. He didn't ask for stories. Proxima system, he said. His voice was a low rasp. 1,500 credits. Pay half now. Half on arrival. No refunds if you get shot. It was a simple, brutal transaction. The universe was full of collisions between corporations and outlaws, and men like Vex navigated the cracks. He offered passage, not protection. His ship was a means of escape, not a guarantee of safety. Kieran boarded the ship. The metal decking felt solid under his boots. His hands were still shaking from the fight in the command center. He flexed his fingers, trying to steady them. The knuckles were raw. He could still feel the impact of his wrench against armor, the vibration up his arm. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow ache in its place. He found a storage crate to sit on, the cold metal seeping through his clothes. The hum of the ship's engines was a different sound from the machines in his shop. This was a sound of motion, of leaving things behind. Arya moved to Celia's side. She took the girl's arm, her touch light but firm. There was a deep cut along Celia's forearm from flying debris. Arya cleaned it with a sterile wipe from a pouch on her belt. She applied a coagulant patch, her movements efficient and sure. She didn't speak. Her calm was a physical presence in the cramped hold, a steadying force against the lingering panic. She checked Kieran next, her eyes scanning for injuries he hadn't noticed. A bruise was already darkening on his jaw. She nodded once, a silent all clear. Her expertise was a quiet anchor in the chaos. Celia stood by a viewport, watching terrace shrink behind them. The rain and smoke obscured the details, turning the colony into a smudge of light against the dark planet. Her expression was hard. "I will warn the High Council," she said. Her voice was low but clear in the humming silence of the hold. "They will see the data. They will have to believe." It was more than a plan. It was a vow. She was done being a victim. She would use her name, her title, her very existence to rally a defense. She would rebuild what was broken. No one would have to scavenge in the rain like she had. That future ended with her. The data drive felt heavy in her hand. It was a small, unremarkable object. A piece of black metal with a few connection ports. But its contents were a weapon. It held the proof of the Draenoid invasion. Timetables, fleet dispositions, weaknesses. It was the difference between a whispered rumor and a confirmed threat. It was the leverage they needed to turn a galaxy's ignorance into action. They had it. The risks they had taken, the fight they had survived, it was all for this. The girl who had eaten leftovers from the gutter was gone. In her place stood a leader. Her back was straight. Her silver eyes held a new light, a cold fire of determination. She was no longer just carrying a secret. She was carrying a cause. The path forward was clear. Warn the Verdani. Show them the proof. Prepare for war. They had a destination. They had evidence. The running was over. The real fight was just beginning. The smuggler's ship leapt into the swirling blue tunnel of hyperspace, leaving the ruins of their old lives far behind. Kieran held the data drive. It was cold in his palm. In the smuggler's dimly lit hold, they gathered around a small workbench. Arya jacked it into a portable reader. The screen flickered to life, displaying a complex tactical interface. It wasn't just a list of targets. It was a complete invasion matrix. Attack vectors charted across known space, pinpointing vulnerable colony worlds. Fleet compositions detailed down to ship classes and weapon loadouts. Timetables for the initial assault waves, measured in standard galactic cycles. The information was precise, terrifying, and complete. It was a blueprint for conquest. Billions of lives depended on this intelligence. The people on those colony worlds had no idea what was coming. They were farmers, miners, traders. They went about their days unaware that their star systems were marked for subjugation or annihilation. The data was a warning that could save them. It could turn a surprise attack into a prepared defense. It was the difference between a massacre and a battle. The weight of it was immense. It filled the small space of the hold, a silent pressure on all of them. Celia stood watching the screen. Her expression had changed. The fear was gone, burned away in the fight at the facility. Her face was set. Her silver eyes absorbed the star charts and timelines. She was no longer a refugee. She was an ally. Her knowledge of her enemies, once a burden that isolated her, was now a weapon she could share. Her resolve hardened into something solid and unbreakable. She was done running from this war. She was ready to fight it. Kieran looked at her. He saw the shift. He saw the dignity in her posture, the clarity in her eyes. He had seen it back in the rain when others saw only a scavenger. He had offered a nutrient bar to a person, not a stray. That act had led him here. His loneliness, a hollow space he had carried for years, found a new purpose. It was filled by the shared mission, the common goal. He was no longer just a solitary mechanic. He was part of something that mattered. His skills had a direction. Arya studied the data, her fingers tracing a potential supply route on the screen. She was already planning, calculating flight paths to the nearest Verdani listening posts, estimating response times, identifying which militia groups could be rallied fastest. Her mind was building a resistance network from the raw information on the screen. It was a quiet, deliberate process. She was turning chaos into a strategy, one calculation at a time. The mechanic was no longer just fixing machines. The tools in his hands could now build more than engines. They could help build a defense. His understanding of systems could be used to fortify a planet, to disrupt an invasion fleet's logistics. The work was different, but the principles were the same. Identify the problem. Find the weak point. Apply the right pressure. He saw the entire conflict now as a broken machine, and he knew how to make it work for them instead of against them. They had a chance to change the galaxy. It was a slim chance. The Draenoids had fleets. They had resources. They had a plan. But now so did the Resistance. They had proof. They had a warning. They had a starting point. The girl who had been hunted was now a key part of the counterattack. The mechanic who kept to himself was now a strategist. The fight was just beginning. The real work started now. The proximity alarm shrieked through the smuggler's ship. On the main display, a vessel dropped out of warp. It was Ka's ship, scarred and angry. Its weapons ports glowed a hot, dangerous orange. They were targeting. Vex cursed and slammed his hand on the console. "They're launching interceptors," his co-pilot said, voice tight. The smaller, faster ships peeled away from the main vessel, accelerating toward them. The chase wasn't over. It had just gotten more dangerous. They were forced into a choice: stand and fight a ship they couldn't hope to defeat, or make a blind jump into hyperspace. The calculations were incomplete. The nav computer flashed warnings about uncharted gravitational anomalies. It was a dangerous jump. The risk of being torn apart was real, but the risk of staying was certain death. Vex began the sequence. "Charging jump drive, 30 seconds to hyperspace capability," the co-pilot announced. The countdown was a timer on their lives. The interceptors closed the distance. Their weapons fire streaked past the view screen. One bolt hit their rear shields. The ship shuddered. "Shields held, though barely," the co-pilot reported. "They wouldn't hold against another." Celia moved to the viewport. She placed her hands against the cold, transparent steel. Her eyes closed. She focused. Outside, the lead interceptor veered violently off course as if shoved by an invisible hand. Then another spun away, its engines flaring in a desperate attempt to stabilize. Her growth as a force multiplier was undeniable. This was different from the factory. There was no strain on her face, no blood from her nose. In the void, with no gravity to fight, her power flowed more freely. "I pushed their ship with my mind," she said, her voice calm. "It's easier in space." She wasn't just disrupting things anymore. She was commanding the environment. She was becoming the weapon she was always meant to be, turning the enemy's advantage into a liability. Kieran was at the engineering station. His hands flew across the controls, rerouting power from non-essential systems to reinforce the weakening shields. He understood the ship's mechanics intuitively, seeing its systems as a diagram in his mind. He bypassed a failing power coupling, patched the shield frequency to better disperse energy weapons. His mechanical skills were no longer for repair alone. They were for survival. He was keeping the fragile ship together long enough to make the jump. Arya stood between them, her eyes on the tactical display. Her voice was a steady anchor in the chaos. "Interceptor 3 is breaking off. Focus power to starboard shields." She coordinated their defense, a calm center in the storm. She didn't shout. She assessed, directed, and acted. Her experience in combat was the glue that held their frantic efforts together. She turned their individual actions into a coordinated defense. The hyperspace drive finally reached charge. The ship lurched as it leapt into the swirling blue and purple tunnel of the jump. The enemy ships vanished from the scopes. The immediate threat was gone. The ship was silent except for the deep hum of the engines. They had escaped. But the relief was temporary. The threat lingered. Ka's ship was still out there. The Draenoid invasion was still coming. This was a respite, not a victory. Vex set new coordinates based on the data they carried. The navigation console beeped its confirmation. Their destination was Verdani Prime. It was the heart of what remained of free space, the only place that might listen. The princess would seek aid from the High Council, her testimony backed by the stolen data drive. The mechanic would join the fight, his skills now dedicated to a cause larger than any machine. The path was set. The running was over. The real confrontation lay ahead. He once believed he had nothing left to give. His world was a small room filled with the smell of oil and ozone. The machines he fixed were predictable. They broke in ways he could understand. People did not. His isolation was a choice, a shield built from past failures. He had learned that helping others led to loss. It was easier to keep his head down, to focus on the work in front of him. The hum of a repaired engine was a clean sound. It asked for nothing he couldn't provide. His hands were stained with the proof of his solitude, the grease a permanent mark of a life spent avoiding connection. Celia's vulnerability forced him to see beyond himself. He saw her in the rain, a blue-skinned girl fighting for scraps. It was a common sight on Terrace. Most people looked away. He did not. Her wariness was a mirror of his own, but her need was greater. Offering the nutrient bar was a small act. It crossed a line he had drawn long ago. It was the first crack in the wall he had built. Her situation demanded more than a single gesture. It demanded action. Her life was in danger. and his refusal to help would have been a choice with its own consequence. He could not unsee her. He became a protector. He used his knowledge of the colony's underbelly to find her safer places to sleep. He became a strategist, mapping the weaknesses in the Syndicate's facility, turning its own systems against it. He became an ally, standing beside Arya and Celia, his skills complementing theirs. His mind, trained to diagnose faults, now worked to exploit them for a greater purpose. The fear of connection was replaced by the necessity of it. He fought not because he wanted to, but because he had to, because it was right. His hands, still stained with grease, now held a future. They held tools that disabled trackers, that rerouted power to create diversions, that helped pilot a ship to safety. They were the same hands doing different work. The future they held was not just his. It was Celia's. It was the future of the colonies that depended on the data she carried. His purpose had been rewritten. The value of his skill was no longer measured in credits earned, but in lives potentially saved. He accepted a role in Verdani intelligence. It was a formal acknowledgement of the path he was already on. They needed people who understood how things worked, who could break systems as well as build them. His application was not on paper. It was written in the events on Terrace. His interview was the fight in the processing plant. His resume was the successful escape with the data drive. He was a resource they could not afford to waste. The mechanic found meaning in helping others. The hollow space inside him, the one he had filled with solitude and the noise of machines, was now occupied by a shared mission. The work was harder. The risks were greater, but the reward was a reason to get up in the morning that was larger than himself. He saw the potential in people where he had once only seen complications. He saw the strength in a team where he had once seen only liability. He saw value where others saw scraps. He had seen it in Celia from the beginning. Others saw a homeless alien. He saw intelligence, resilience, a will to survive. That sight changed everything. It forced him to look at the world differently, to see potential where others saw problems. It taught him that the most valuable things are often overlooked, discarded, or hunted. Real strength lies in recognizing that value and fighting to protect it. His journey from cynic to hero was complete. It was not a sudden transformation. It was a series of choices, each one pulling him further from his old life. It started with a decision to offer help and ended with a commitment to a cause. He was no longer the man who hid in a repair shop. He was someone who stood his ground. He had faced a superior enemy and survived. He had made a difference. He was no longer alone. The silence in his shop was gone, replaced by the low hum of a ship's engine and the quiet conversations of his companions. The isolation he had cultivated for years was broken. He had allies. He had a purpose that connected him to something larger. The fear of being let down was still there, but it was outweighed by the reality of trust that had been earned in fire and smoke. He had a place. He had a team. He was home. She stood by the viewport as the ship cut through the void. The blue of her skin was no longer something to hide. It was a marker, a claim. She was a beacon now, a focal point for a coalition of beings who had lost their way. Her presence offered them a direction, a cause. The scattered remnants of resistance, the broken factions and lost patrols. They would see her and remember what they were fighting for. She gave them a face to follow. A symbol that was not an idea, but a person. Her royal blood was no longer a death sentence. It was a tool. The pendant around her neck, the seal of her house, was not just a piece of stone. It was a promise. It stood for order, for a time before the Syndicate, before the fear. People looked at it and saw a future that could be rebuilt. It was a symbol of hope in a galaxy that had run short on it. Her lineage was a fact they could hold on to, a story that did not have to end in ashes. She carried the weight of civilizations in her memory. It was not a metaphor. The genetic data encoded in her cells was a living record of strategies and secrets, star charts of forgotten routes, the deployment schedules of enemy fleets, the structural weaknesses of their warships. It was all there, a biological library of survival. The fate of billions rested on her ability to protect that knowledge and to use it. The responsibility was a physical pressure, a constant awareness in the back of her mind. She had been running from this weight her whole life. Now she stood still and let it settle on her shoulders. She would warn the High Council. She would stand before them and present the data drive. She would show them the proof. Her voice, once used only to ask for scraps, would now demand action. She would rally the scattered defenses, turn the disconnected militias into an army. Her words would give them a common enemy and a common goal. She was not going to beg for help. She was going to outline a strategy for victory. Her telekinesis was no longer a curse she had to suppress. It was a tool, a weapon. She had feared it because it made her a target. Now she understood its value. It was an edge, a way to disrupt an enemy's plan, to create an opening where there was none. It drained her, left her weak and shaking, but the cost was acceptable. The power was a part of her, and denying it was a weakness she could no longer afford. She would learn its limits. She would master it. She made a vow to herself, looking out at the stars. No one would suffer as she had. No child would have to sleep in a warm air shaft, clutching a piece of rotten fruit. No one would be hunted for their blood or their name. The galaxy was full of places like Terrace, full of people living in the shadows. She would build something that reached them. A system of protection. Her own suffering would become the foundation for a safer universe. The girl who ate leftovers from the gutter was gone. In her place was a princess. The title was not about palaces or parades. It was about duty. It was about responsibility to those who had none. Her courage was a quiet thing. It was not about a lack of fear. It was about acting despite it. That courage began to infect those around her. Kieran fought harder. Arya planned with more certainty. They saw her stand firm and found their own resolve strengthened. She embraced her role as a leader. It was not a choice she made lightly. It was an acceptance of the path that had been laid out for her. She would use her name, her history, and her power to protect others. The survival instincts that had kept her alive in the market would now be used to safeguard a galaxy. She was ready. The galaxy had a chance because of her. It was a slim chance. The enemy was vast and well organized. But for the first time, the resistance had a center. It had a symbol. It had a leader who understood the cost of war because she had already paid it. The hope she offered was not a naive dream. It was a hard-won possibility, bought with pain and sealed with a vow. The fight was far from over, but it was no longer a foregone conclusion. 3 beings, once strangers, now a team. A mechanic, a doctor, and a princess. Their worlds should never have crossed. One fixed machines in a small shop. One mended broken bodies in the shadows. One ran for her life in the gutters. They were separate notes, each playing a different tune. Then circumstance forced them into accord, and the music they made was a weapon. Their diverse talents forged a powerful bond under pressure. Kieran's skills were with systems. He knew circuits and conduits, power flows, and structural stresses. He saw a factory not as a building, but as a diagram of vulnerabilities. His mind dissected problems logically, finding the one wire to cut, the one valve to turn. His hands, stained with engine grease, were now tools for sabotage and strategic collapse. He turned the enemy's own infrastructure against them. Arya's combat skills were the sharp end of their spear. She moved with a quiet, lethal grace. Her knowledge of anatomy was for disabling, not healing. A pressure point strike to the neck. A precise blow to a knee joint. She neutralized threats without noise, creating paths through secure areas. Her calm was a tactical asset. In the middle of chaos, she assessed, decided, and acted. She was their shield and their silent knife. Celia brought power and intelligence to the alliance. Her telekinesis disrupted enemy formations, shattered surveillance, and created diversions when all else failed. But her true value was the data she carried, the strategic knowledge encoded in her blood. She was their objective and their most valuable asset. Her mind, sharpened by survival, assessed risks and calculated odds with a cold clarity. She was the reason they fought, and she became a key part of how they fought.